Welcome, Nick Gibb. You're the Conservative Shadow Schools Minister, a job you've been in since May 2005. And of course, you're a former chartered accountant and been an MP since 1997. Now, I noticed looking at your biography, you've been to an awful lot of schools. I mean, as a pupil, you went to a number of schools. Why was that? And did that have any influence on your views on education now?
Yes, I mean, I wasn't expelled.
I'm glad to hear it.
We moved house every 2 or 3 years. My father was a civil engineer, and so I've experienced quite a number of different types of schools. And I started school in '65 and finished school in 1978, and I saw firsthand some of the reforms that were happening in the 60s and 70s to education. So it has influenced my opinion about schools. I saw a very traditional approach to teaching in my primary school. I saw education in Canada. I was at a grammar school for a year, and then a good comprehensive for my O-levels, and then a very poor comprehensive for my A-levels. So I've seen a whole range of schools.
I suggest therefore that you tended to be not so impressed with perhaps the more progressive changes that were happening in education at that time?
Yes, I saw standards decline over that period in the types of schools I went to. Even the good comprehensive I went to had just gone comprehensive when I started there, but even during those 3 years I was there, you could see standards drifting, and some of the dedicated teachers were feeling they were being pushed out of the school, which was a great shame.
Just looking at one of the big issues that started this school year, diplomas. I know from a lot of teachers and head teachers there's a real concern about whether there would still be support for diplomas if there's a change of government. Can you give them any reassurance?
Well, we want to see how they work. We want them to succeed, but they have to provide a very high quality vocational education for the vocational part of the diplomas. They also have to provide a very high quality academic education for the academic part, the English, the maths, the science, within the diploma framework. And if they do that, and if employers are happy with them, then we'll be delighted and we'll hope that they succeed. What we don't want to do is to keep having this change that's happening the whole time. The last 10 years, it's been like a permanent revolution, whether that comes from the QCA or the department. And I think what teachers need now is a bit of stability. So let these things settle down.
Do you see them as vocational qualification? I mean, this seems to be one of the problems. No one can quite decide whether they're vocational, whether they're academic, or whether they're applied, or quite what they are.
Well, yes. I mean, they contain academic elements in them because they have an English component, you know, maths and other academic. Fine. So that's the academic part. And then there's a vocational part. Now, if they're not vocational and they're not academic, what are they? And this is what worries me, that they become neither one thing nor the other. And that will lead them to becoming a very unpopular qualification. So we have to make sure that they are rigorous, both in the academic part and in the vocational part. And we shouldn't be ashamed to call things vocational if that's what they are.
If you come to power in a couple of years' time, and it's still a relatively small number of students doing it, and of course they are expensive, will there be a temptation to say, well, we'll save that money, we'll save some of that bureaucratic apparatus that goes with them and simply get rid of them?
We'll have to review it. We want them to succeed, and so we'll have to see what happens in practice. The problem with the whole diploma process is that it is very complicated, having this combination of subjects that fits into an overall umbrella. That's why we don't want to go down the Tomlinson route of extending the Tomlinson agenda to the traditional academic subjects, because we think it is too complicated and the public won't understand it, therefore they won't have the public support.
Although most teachers really liked the original Tomlinson approach, didn't they?
Yes, but you know, it's a matter of will these qualifications have the support of employers and parents and students? And we'll see what happens with the vocational diplomas. But in terms of extending that approach to academic subjects, I think we're not persuaded that it's necessary.
Looking ahead to the sort of policies that you might implement if you come into power, things that are in your green paper, the opportunity agenda. One of the things you call for there is more teaching by ability. Yet you'll also be saying that schools and teachers should have more freedom to do their own thing. So how do you balance that out? You're telling them they should organise their pupils in a particular way by ability, and yet you're saying they should have the freedom from government interference. I don't quite see how those two match up.
Well, there are a whole range of initiatives that keep emanating from the department. That every day something will come out, and you go into schools and you see these lever arch files that are stuffed in the store cupboard, never read, and all they do is cause stress for teachers. We want to sweep away all those things, but we do have a small number of imperatives. One is synthetic phonics in the teaching of reading. The second is teaching by ability, and the third is about discipline and behaviour in schools.
So there is a temptation, isn't there, inevitably, for you to tell teachers to teach in the way that you personally think is right, or you as a party think is right. Isn't that interfering with their freedom?
Well, no, because there has to be a national curriculum. There have to be nationally set tests, which inevitably means somebody has to decide what that curriculum is going to be. Now, we're not going to sit down, Michael Gove and I, and say, well, let's teach this, this and this. It'll be done in the way it's done at the moment, through panels of experts, through the QCA. But there are some imperatives that we are determined to ensure happen, and setting by ability is one of those, who Ofsted looking at. But again, we won't be passing laws saying you shalt do this.
But it'll be asking Ofsted to look and check whether or not they're doing it, to report if they're not. If
those schools are not performing above, the expected level, if a school is producing wonderful results, if it's Mossbourne Academy producing some fantastic results for the children that go to that school, we're not going to be worried at all about what they do. They could have every teacher standing on their head in that school. Whatever they do, it's obviously working. But what we'll also do is look around the country to see the schools that are producing fantastic results for children, providing a really good quality education, and saying, well, look, this is clearly best practice. Let's make sure that this best practice is disseminated.
And what if teachers really sincerely believe that actually teaching by ability is not the right way forward?
Well, if it's producing the results, then Ofsted will be very content and will, give them all the awards that they need. But if the school is underperforming and it's letting down children, particularly children from deprived backgrounds, then they will be, this will be noted in Ofsted's reports.
Let's look at the supply side revolution, going to create 220,000 new school places, and yet there are already surplus places in the system. So just explain how that's going to work and how it will be affordable.
Well, it's about making it easier for outside bodies to set up schools. We were in Sweden, Michael Gove and I, recently, and we saw there a system that enabled 900 new schools to be established within 15 years, because parents were unhappy with the state provision that was happening. That's the key, to enable it, to make it much easier for schools to be established by educational foundations, by church, by livery companies, by parents. And that will deliver choice. Now, the issue about surplus places, if you look at an area that has a lot of surplus places, the traditional view is, well, you can't set up a school in those areas because there are all these surplus places to fill. But the question we should be asking is, why are there surplus places in those areas? Doesn't that indicate something about the happiness of parents about the schools in those areas? So our view is actually that the places where you do need the new schools are particularly in those areas where there are surplus places. It's similar to the academy proposals. These schools will have the same freedoms as academies, but what we want to do is to sweep away the bureaucratic hurdles to establishing an academy, and they are sometimes so powerful, these hurdles, that many providers have had a disincentive and have been driven away by the process. We want to sweep those away, make it easier to set them up in areas of surplus places. The planning laws need to be changed to make it easier. A lot of the schools we saw in Sweden were actually in office blocks, and they spent £300,000, £400,000 renovating those office blocks into very beautiful schools. You don't need to spend £30 million on a Richard Rogers school that conforms to a template designed school that sits in the department. And a lot of people have been complaining about how restrictive those rules are about the design of schools as well.
Now, another area I'd like to talk a little bit about is the pupil premium, as you call it, putting more resources towards pupils from deprived backgrounds. You just explain how you're going to do that in practice. Does that mean paying more to teachers in inner city areas, or simply a bigger per pupil funding for those schools? I mean, they already get more anyway at the moment, but just explain that.
Well, it's quite simple. At the moment, that money goes to the local authority. They look at the numbers and the amount of deprivation, and they get an extra chunk of money. They then decide how to allocate that to the schools in their local authority. What we want to say is that any pupil, any child that lives in an area of deprivation as defined currently by the government, that money attaches to the pupil. So if the pupil leaves that area and goes to a school over here, the money will follow. And what we think will happen as a consequence is that the new providers will have an extra incentive to set up schools in area of social deprivation. And if you look at the results of schools, some of the poorest results come from the poorest areas. And in fact, what we need in this country is better schools to be in the poorer areas. You know,
in the past, you'd have said schools were about learning. Now you're saying they're also about advancing social mobility.
Yes, well, you get social mobility by having a well-educated society, and the education takes place in the schools. I think we had a bad press, frankly, in the past when we were tackling big economic issues facing our country, and we became tagged with this economic obsession, and therefore people, I think, lost sight of the fact that we did actually believe in high quality education.
Let's look at Ofsted. You've said you'd like to see unannounced lightning inspections just turning up completely out of the blue, but also longer inspections with every teacher in the school inspected. Do you just feel that Ofsted's not doing a thorough enough job at the moment then?
I think teachers feel a lack of confidence. If they're marked down with a poor report and they've not seen an inspector in the school, let alone in their own lesson, it's hard to take that judgment as being valid. And I think you shouldn't just base your judgment of a school on a bunch of figures on a computer screen. There really has to be some thorough examination of what's going on in the school if the result of the Ofsted report is to be taken seriously.
But aren't they going to feel permanently on edge, the thought that the inspector could walk through the door into their classroom at any moment, completely unannounced, and you know, luck being the way it is, that just on the one day they're having a bad day with a difficult class or whatever, and they're not going to feel very relaxed about that prospect.
If you are used to having visitors coming in and senior management of the school looking at lessons to make sure that good practice is being spread in the school, then I don't think it should be particularly stressful for a teacher having an inspection. I think teachers would prefer the judgment of the school to be based on fact. So, if, you know, an unannounced inspection, look at the classrooms, look at what's going on in the school, and look at the results of the school. That is the fairest way to inspect a school.
Okay, looking at the big picture, now, there are a lot of people who say, actually, these days there's not much difference between the political parties. You know, you're all in favour of more testing, demanding sort of targets, supply side of new schools. Where would you say then is the real nitty-gritty or the philosophical difference between you and the Labour government?
That we do believe in parental choice. You get the impression with Ed Balls that
they talk a lot about it.
That he's inherited it from the Blair administration, but they don't really believe in it. Since Ed Balls became Secretary of State, he has reduced the amount of freedom that the academies have over the curriculum, about their involvement with the local authority. We really want to give genuine freedom to schools to manage their own process. And that is the big difference, to bring in new providers, to have a diversity of provision of education, which we believe will force up standards.
So it's parental choice and more market forces. Would that be a summary really of where you would differ from government?
Yes, within the state sector. So not real market forces, but just choice, more provision. That will mean a slight increase in the number of surplus places to oil the choice, so that choice for parents is genuine, and that there isn't a situation where in a particular area there's one good school that every parent wants their children to go to and 5 they end up going to unhappily. We really want there to be genuine choice, and it might even be choice of types of education. We saw in Sweden the Kunskapsskolan, which is a very progressive approach to education. There may well be some parents who want that kind of education for their children. There may be others parents who want a more traditional knowledge-based education for their children. They should be able to have that education for their children.
Nick Gibb, Shadow Schools Minister, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.